introduction in the chat. While everyone continues just sending a few words to let us know where you're from, we're going to get started and begin our presentation. Okay. Alrighty. Just to clarify, can everyone please let us know if you see our presentation up? Just making sure everyone can see this. Okay, great. Great. Okay, thank you. So yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cristian Moreno Rodriguez. I am the director of El Pueblo Unido of Atlantic City. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization located right here in Atlantic County, as well as Cape May County now. I'm joined here by our community organizer, Alexander Mendoza, and we are presenting live from our new community center space right here in the 5th Ward of Atlantic City on Atlantic Ave. And we look forward to, after this conversation, staying in dialogue and inviting everyone to our grand opening this fall. And so without further ado, I'll start with a brief overview of El Pueblo Unido. Our name is in Spanish and what that means. And then we'll sort of go right into our Know Your Rights presentation. That's really meant for allies, nonprofit organizational partners, folks that would like to, that care about their neighbors and just want to help keep an eye on their neighbors with what's happening right now at the federal level. Like I did mention, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. El Pueblo means the people, and so we are grassroots in nature. And everything that's being covered is based off policy, based off law, and not necessarily based off any political affiliation or partisan in nature. And so we really are here to just educate and empower. And so after this, if you'd like to get in contact based off of what you learned today, and if you would like to be part of our movement, we would love to just keep in communication with everyone. So Pueblo Unido did this past December just turn 5 years old. So we've been organizing since December 16, 2019. That's the day in New Jersey that a piece of legislation known as A4743, the Driver's License for All bill, was passed in New Jersey. And so Pueblo Unido attended the statewide protest that day. We got there in Trenton around 8 a.m. and we didn't leave till about 11 p.m. until the legislation was passed. But it was on the bus ride back after we had just won this monumental piece of legislation for our communities that would provide driver's licenses for all, regardless of immigration status, that our community members really started talking about building something sustainable for the next steps, right? There was no statewide campaign anymore. It was just like, what are we going to do in our local community of Atlantic County, of Cape May County, to continue educating the people, to host Know Your Rights workshops, and provide these services for our folks. And so most of these folks on the call today, I take it, are from South Jersey or part of a larger network that operates in South Jersey. And in our part of the state, there aren't necessarily too many organizations doing this specific type of work. And so we proudly are one of the few that are doing this work. But we need more. We need more support, more resources, more volunteers. And so we hope that if we can educate you on something as empowering as Know Your Rights, that you could then take it back to your neighbors, to your neighborhoods, to your organizations, and we could sort of spread the information and the empowerment that way. And so we do focus on families, on workers, on tenants, and the youth. And we do that through the provision of legal services, social services, educational services, and community organizing. And so this is just to put it a little bit into context, what our direct services look like, whether they're ESL classes, whether they're NJ Family Care application assistance days, whether it means dividing and providing resources outside of our local bodega here in Atlantic City. Whatever it is, we've either done it or we're down to partner with those who are doing it. We do our annual or biannual Mexican Consulate Days of Service here in Atlantic City now for the past 5-6 years. We bring, for example, the Mexican consulate, and in the course of 2 days, we do about 300 appointments to just make sure they can get their passports, their birth certificates, things that they can then use to get their license afterwards. And then, of course, our Know Your Rights workshops are there in the background. One thing that we do have going for us, because while we're a small but mighty team, we have the trust of our people, of our community members. Over the past 5 years, we've advocated, we've raised our voice, we've shown up at city council meetings, at Board of Education meetings, at county commissioner meetings, and in the streets of our community to make sure that the voices of those marginalized are not ignored or never forgotten. And so for the past 5 years, we've been working to gain the trust of our community members. They know that when Pueblo Unido is involved, we're not there to put them at risk. We're not there to, sort of just use them for a photo op. And so we're very intentional with the way we organize, with the way we operate. And I think it sort of shows here that when the time comes to come together, Pueblo Unido, right? The people united. Since January, since the new administration has taken office, we've trained approximately over 750 community members in person through our Know Your Rights workshops. And so we started off in Atlantic City. We've done some all over Atlantic County. We've done some in Ocean City, which is part of Cape May County. We've done a lot virtually as well. We've trained other nonprofit partners as well. Locally, we've trained our allies at Crops, which is in Atlantic City. We did a whole training for the staff at Jewish Family Services, JFS, the NAACP of Atlantic City, all just to spread the information and empower our allies to take a stance. So we don't do it alone. Right now, it's just Alexander and I on the day-to-day, but we have our full board members. And so, for example, our educational board member is a teacher here at Brighton Avenue School. We have an attorney, Mr. Elliot Almanza, who also is working with us on our legal projects. We have professors, and so we do try to get the experts to help us on the day-to-day, and we can't do this work alone. We have our wonderful team of interns, that a new team that's joining us this fall, next week. Alexander himself started off as our legal service intern and is now our community organizer. I am excited to share that this is, you can sort of see it's a little messy now, but this is the space of our new community center. So we're located at 3203 Atlantic Avenue, right in the 5th Ward of Atlantic City, right between Sovereign and Montpelier Avenue, in between Queen's Pizza and Oceanside Family Success Center 2. And so the space would be a space for community organizing, for workshops. We would love to partner with any organization that they need the space. They can call this place home as well, because our community member will call it home. It is a private space, meaning, and you'll sort of learn what that means in a bit, meaning no one, especially ICE agents, can just walk off the street and enter our building. And so because we are here like 24/7, we can let folks in, but really it's not going to be a space accessible to immigration agents. So in all sense of the word, it's a sanctuary for our community members. Everything that you're about to see now is one, we ourselves have gotten trained on Know Your Rights through our coalitional partners. And so we are a member of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. We're one of the only members here in South Jersey. And the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice is a statewide coalition of over 50 immigrant justice organizations throughout New Jersey. So we work on a lot of legislative campaigns with them, including the fight to pass the Immigrant Trust Act. But we're also part of the National Day Laborers Organizing Network, NDALON. And so they're our national coalition partner, where they help us sort of train and learn more about how we can defend our community. So we've done the trainings. We've worked directly with both coalitional partners to create this presentation. We spend hours and hours and hours working on this, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that everyone understands that you don't have to be an attorney to know your rights, and you don't have to be an attorney to talk to your neighbors about their rights. And so we try to break it down as simple as possible, but still in detail and still effective, so that you could, should the day ever come, because it is coming, you feel adequate and prepared enough to defend a neighbor, or defend a partner, or defend a person of your community. And so I guess just like, we always start off with this, because it almost feels like every day there's something in the news. It almost feels like every single day there's an attack on a different community. Every single day there's an attack on the immigrant community. And it almost feels like a war of attrition where we're just getting bottled down on this, like the news that's coming out, whether it's a new executive order, a new policy, a new piece of legislation that's been issued, passed, proposed, stopped in the courts. The purpose of this presentation is not really to get into the numerous executive orders or laws that have been proposed, issued. It's really just to say that through it all, the most important thing to take away is that the rhetoric you hear on the news, the rhetoric you hear on social media is not always fact, and that staying informed is just critical as misinformation continues to spread. The only constant really throughout the last few months is the fact that at the end of the day, only the people will save the people. In Spanish, we say, solo el pueblo salva al pueblo, which means right now that we're like organizations on the ground aren't relying on like a new piece of legislation. We're not relying right now on a pathway to citizenship. We're not really relying on the political system or the judicial or the legislative processes right now. A lot of the organizations in New Jersey are training volunteers and training their staff so that we protect each other as much as legally possible. And so, without further ado, I have a quick, I always like to start off with this. Is anyone here interested in going to law school for the next 3-4 years? No one? Nobody? Okay, let's see, maybe. Okay. Good. For those that aren't interested in law school, we could literally take an entire class, if not a whole semester, on the 14th Amendment, or we can take an entire class or read a bunch of case law on the Fifth Amendment. A lot of these amendments are very nuanced, are very complicated, but we try to break them down as simply as possible so that you don't have to go to law school to apply these protections on an everyday level. And so without having to read this, we break it down into 4 simple statements. And our entire Know Your Rights presentation is based off of these 4 amendments. And that could be the 14th Amendment, which basically guarantees everyone equal protection under the law from discrimination based on race, nationality, gender, and more. The 4th Amendment, which is everyone's right against unlawful entry into your private domicile. The 5th Amendment, which is the right to remain silent. It's fundamental. And the 6th Amendment, which is your right to legal representation. And we get into a little bit more detail. But rest assured, all our information has been vetted. We have an attorney on staff. We have a teacher. We've trained over 750 community members. At the end of this month, we're going to all the schools of the Atlantic City School District in our neighborhoods to present to all the parents. And so we're going to 5 different schools in 5 different days, and they'll be receiving more or less the same information, but in Spanish. This presentation specifically applies to the boxes in yellow, and that is the specific agency under the Department of Homeland Security known as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or the 3-letter acronym ICE. And so this is the primary agency right now in this country that is tasked with enforcing or carrying out immigration arrests, detention, and removals. Under ICE, under Immigration and Customs Enforcement, there are sub-agencies with additional 3-letter acronyms known as Enforcement and Removal Operations, or ERO, or Homeland Security Investigations, HSI. And so we explain this part to the community because we really want them to, if they see something in their community, these acronyms are sort of a dead giveaway that it is immigration involved in this particular instance. So if you see the letters ICE, ERO, HSI, it does indicate that whatever's happening at the scene has to do with immigration. It could be a mix of different things, but immigration is involved at that point. Aside from ICE, in different presentations, we go over, for example, what USCIS is, which is the administrative agency that handles the bulk of immigration applications in this country. And then there is an agency also known as CBP, Border Patrol, and this is sort of where it gets even more complicated. Typically, you think that CBP operates in the southern border, right? Like anywhere throughout Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. That's typically where we hear the name Border Patrol. But in reality, CBP has the ability and sometimes does operate anywhere in a 100-mile radius of the entire border of the United States. So the 100-mile radius isn't just the southern border, it goes all throughout the four borders of the United States, whether it's the north, west, east. And so technically New Jersey is actually within the 100-mile radius that CBP can operate. And so that's sometimes dealing with like interstate traffic, Greyhound buses, buses that are really just like on federal roads is sometimes where you'll see interactions with CBP. But for right now, this presentation primarily goes over ICE, ERO, and HSI operations. Okay. We like to start off by making a distinction. And if anyone has any questions in the chat, please, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. We are reading them, and so we can sort of address them as things go along. But the first distinction that we make in any Know Your Rights presentation is the difference between who can be arrested, which are many individuals, including right now, even veterans, United States citizens, legal permanent residents, those with DACA. Many are being arrested, but there's a distinction between those that can be arrested and those that are ultimately subject to deportation. And so we like to make this distinction because many folks are being arrested. Many folks are, for all intents and purposes, being kidnapped off a street. But when it comes to the process of deportation, that's an official judicial or court process. And so many at that point can argue their case. Many can hire an attorney. And so just because you're arrested doesn't mean you'll be subject to deportation. And that's the first distinction that we try to make to a lot of folks, because the battle doesn't end or hope isn't lost the moment of your arrest. And so the truth is that immigration or immigration agents can arrest individuals if they find probable cause, which is reasonable suspicion, that the person that they're talking to or the subject of their interview is in the United States in violation of immigration laws, those without status. And so for this reason, you hear a lot in the news that right now ICE is only focusing on individuals that have this probable cause of violating these laws, right? Folks that have been denied asylum and are now placed in deportation proceedings, people that have been here prior to people that have been deported already, or people that have committed crimes. We go over this in a little bit more detail next slide, but what we're trying to say is that that's not necessarily true anymore, that the narrative that they're only going after targeted individuals is no longer true in South Jersey. We have seen what we call collateral arrests. We have seen what we call public raids right here in South Jersey, including Ocean City, which is in May County. And so a good example of what these terms mean of collateral arrests or public raids is the case that we had in Ocean City. And so maybe ICE one day comes to someone's door, and this is what this presentation goes over, and they knock on the door and they're asking for Christian Moreno, or they're asking for Alexander or Julie Hain. And instead of that person, it's someone else that opens up. A collateral arrest, by definition, is when someone that's not the subject of the operation is instead arrested, or a public raid is when they aren't looking for anyone specific and they're just looking for whoever they can find probable cause on. And so we have seen that in May County. We do have some photos and some videos that we'll go over in a little bit. But essentially, it's no longer like targeted arrest. There's no longer any sense of like pattern that we're finding of folks that, they're only going after the highest levels of quote unquote criminals. That's no longer the case. They took someone from our community in Ocean City that doesn't have a criminal record, that has been here for over 2 years, and for all intents and purposes is innocent. But because they find probable cause, they were able to detain him, and he's currently in Delaney Hall, which is in Newark, New Jersey, about to be subject to deportation. A lot of these arrests are not just happening at the home, they're also happening at ICE check-in appointments, in courthouses, ports of entry, which are airports essentially, and then transfers from jails that honor ICE detainers. And so, while many can be arrested at first based off this probable cause, not all immigrants face the same risk of deportation. And so, oftentimes, before we saw this federal administration change some things, Oftentimes, those without status, those that are in this country undocumented, often had the right to a bond hearing before a judge. And so what this essentially means is at a bond hearing before an immigration judge, you had the right to ask for a bond, which basically means that you would be released on your own recognizance, often paying some sort of financial, collateral, and you'd be allowed to argue the rest of your case outside with your family. There'd be monthly check-ins or some sort of like timeline, but essentially you'd be allowed to fight your entire case outside of detention. But right now, we see that a lot of immigrants in this state, New Jersey, are being denied a bond hearing, or that we see that those that are getting denied their bond hearing are getting removed expeditiously. And so if I can clarify that for one moment, if you get arrested by ICE and you've been in this country for less than 2 years, we are seeing that you're getting expeditiously removed, which means that you don't get that right to a bond hearing. You don't really ever speak to a judge, and you're usually back in your home state or home country, which oftentimes could be, for most of our community members, is Mexico, within about 2 to 3 weeks, from the moment of your arrest to by the time you land back in Mexico. And that just happened to one of our community members in Pleasantville. She was a mom, and left behind a 17-year-old daughter, but essentially just never had that right to an immigration bond hearing. Those that also don't have a right to a bond hearing are those that have previously been deported and made their way back into the country, again, for whatever reason, whether it's to provide food on the family for the family, food on the table. If you have already been ordered deported and they find out, you're not subject, you don't have that right to a bond hearing. And now, unfortunately, just with criminal charges, you also don't have a right to a bond hearing. So we're not saying criminal convictions, we're saying criminal charges. So just based off of being charged with a crime, you could be 100% innocent, and some data suggests that most of them are innocent. Just by being charged with a crime, you no longer have that due process to having a bond hearing, and you could be subject to immediate deportation back to your home country, which again happened to one of our community members. And so she had just hired an attorney for a criminal case. She was being charged with something that she said she was innocent of. She spent over $10,000 for that private attorney, but within a week, she was arrested by immigration. And about a week after that, she was back in her home country of Mexico with no bond hearing, no nothing. So she never had the opportunity to prove her innocence because she had no due process in this country. And that's actually happening a lot, and it's sort of a little nerve-wracking for us here in our part of South Jersey. And so we talked a lot about probable cause. Like if you have probable cause, they can arrest you, they can detain you, they can ultimately deport you. And so how do immigration agents typically find probable cause? How do they, if they don't know who you are, if they show up at your house looking for someone else, how does that process look like of determining probable cause before, things escalate? And so typically what happens is an immigration will show up either at your house, a public sidewalk, your restaurant, your place of employment, and they'll just start asking questions, sort of like a fishing expedition. They don't know who you are, and many people don't know that they can refuse to answer if agents, don't have any reasonable suspicion. And so most people just sort of play along and start answering questions because they think it's respectful and it's the right thing to do. But in these questions, in these line of questionings, most community members often reveal where they are born, when they entered the United States, and that they don't ultimately have legal status or even temporary status. And so by divulging this information themselves, our community members, they essentially provide this information to agents, and these agents now have that probable cause to make an arrest. And so we used to say that probable cause cannot be based on race, spoken language, clothing, or physical appearance. That's what's based on the Constitution. But oftentimes there are plenty of video evidence where it's sort of to the contrary of that. But when you start answering questions and you don't assert the right to remain silent, and they ask you, "Where are you from, Alexander?" And Alexander reveals that he's from El Salvador. Just by him answering that question and engaging in that dialogue, he's now given the agent all the information that this person wasn't born in the United States, Now I have reasonable suspicion that you might be here without status, and now I can arrest and detain Alexander so he can now fight his case in the court if he's actually from this country or not. And that's what we're seeing. And so we do go over three situations that are the most common with how to handle ICE encounters. The three situations are at home, which is considered a private space, on the street or while driving, which is considered a public space, and then at work or your place of employment, which is considered a mixed space, which is both public and private. So a combination of the two. So if there's one thing you can take away from this presentation, it's knowing the difference between public and private areas. It could be your office, it could be your home, it could be a colleague's, agency. Knowing the difference between what a public and private space could make all the difference in preventing detention or deportation. So public spaces, public areas are spaces that are readily accessible to the general public. And so a good example here could be like a doctor's office, right? You just walk into a doctor's office, you check in with the receptionist, and then you sit down and you wait until you're called. And so
Real quick.
if it's, yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. What about like events and programming, like public events, like a festival and things like that?
Yes. And so
Okay.
we can sort of get into that. It's really depending on your own operations. But it's considered a public space if it's generally accessible to the public, right? If anyone can just walk off the street and enter this event, enter your business, right? Like for most restaurants, you can just walk in off the street and then go inside to talk to the hostess. For most businesses, you can just go off the street and wait in the lobby. Afterwards, they may ask you to leave, but if you can just walk off the street and enter the space, right? So if it's not really a ticketed event, it's sort of just laissez-faire, there's no perimeter established, everyone's just like walking in, that's generally considered a public area. There's no check-in area, there's no like fenced off spaces. And so you really have to look at this logistically more than anything. And so in public areas, think of like a park, right? You look at a park, there's no fencing, anyone can just walk off, you're just there enjoying a picnic. If they don't need anyone's permission to enter, ICE agents do not need a warrant to enter. And so a private area, on the other hand, are those not readily accessible to the public. So think of private locked offices, staff-only kitchen areas, storage rooms with a key, right? And so if it's not readily accessible to the public, meaning, no one can just, not really, when you walk into a restaurant, no one can just go into the kitchen, right? There's sort of like a line of demarcation. It says staff only, it's marked as staff only or kitchen staff only or private entrance. Or think of your own offices. Maybe the lobby is accessible, but the back private offices are not, right? They have to go through a buzzer door, they have to have a key, you can often lock your office. So if it's not readily accessible to the public, ICE agents must have a judicial warrant signed by a judge to enter unless consent is explicitly given by someone with the authority to do so. So unless you yourself or a person in charge, a manager, an owner, give them permission, they need a warrant to enter. And that's true for any public space, any private space. And so we break it down into 6 simple steps of what to do in public spaces versus private spaces. Again, this is all based off of our Know Your Rights workshops, based off the amendments that we mentioned earlier. And they're the same steps with the exception of the first 2. Why? Why in public spaces are the first 2 steps sort of, why do we go straight to step 3? Because like we mentioned earlier, in public spaces, ICE does not need a warrant to begin to question who you are. ICE does not need a warrant to approach you in a public space. And so that's why the first 2 steps aren't there, because they deal with asking for a warrant, verifying a warrant. And so in private spaces, they are there. And so let's start off with private spaces, right? 1 through 6 is we don't open the door. We ask and verify the warrant. If they have a warrant, we don't answer any questions. We do not consent to searches. We ask if we're free to go, and we don't sign anything. And so public spaces, we just go right into, we don't answer questions. We don't consent to searches. We ask if we're free to go, and we definitely do not sign anything. Okay, and so step number one, in private spaces, right? So step number one is private and has to deal with warrants. So here, ICE needs a valid search warrant to enter, and it's pretty rare if they do have a judicial warrant. And we're going to learn about that in 1 second and how that interacts with local and state police as well. But essentially, if ICE does not have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, a real judicial magistrate, coming from a real court, could be local, state, federal court, not necessarily ICE court. But without this judicial warrant, immigration agents need your permission to enter your home. How do they get that permission? They could say, hey, listen, open up. It's the police, right? They're not saying it's the Atlantic City Police Department. They're not saying it's the state troopers. They're just saying the word police because they can do that. Or they say, open up. We're looking for Christian. And if he's not here, then we'll just leave you alone. Or sometimes culturally, they send parents, send their children, hey, go open the door. It's the food delivery. Hey, go open the door. It's your uncle. And so they don't need express consent. Just by you opening the door to ask who it is, they can then use that as pretext to enter your home. And we've seen that happen. And so when we say that they need your permission to enter your home, they really just need you to open the door. The second you open it a crack, they're allowed to come in. And so this is what the difference between a real district court warrant looks like, a search warrant, versus a United States Department of Homeland Security warrant. And so on the left, can anyone tell us what the top of that line says? Where does this warrant for, it says arrest of alien, come from? Which agency or which court is filing this paperwork? Anyone?
It says US Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
Yeah.
Does anyone think that that's a court? No. So Lizzie says no. And that would be correct. This is not coming from an official court. This is not coming from the Atlantic City local municipal courthouse. This is coming from the Department of Homeland Security, quite literally. And I say this with all seriousness. Any field agent can just print this in their office, in their desk, sign it themselves, and then show up to your home masking that this is a real warrant. When in fact it's a I-200 or the I-205, it's an administrative warrant. It's an immigration warrant. It's not signed by a judge. It's not backed by the United States Constitution. And so if they show up to your home with this warrant, this immigration warrant, you don't have to open up the door, legally speaking. They can't knock down your door and say, we have a warrant. With this document, they can't enter your home forcibly. Whereas on the contrary, a United States District Court warrant or any state or local warrant signed by a judge typically has connotations of there's some sort of investigation, some sort of criminal activity. They have enough probable cause that they reasonably suspect that you are involved in some sort of crime. And if they show up with this warrant, whether you open the door or not, they're coming in, right? If they show up with the judicial warrant, they can knock down your door, they can bust it open and come in, not just with ICE. Typically, when they have this warrant, they're also working with local and state police if it's a serious enough crime. And so if it's a serious enough crime, local and state police can assist them in enforcing that warrant, right? Not necessarily in the immigration activity that follows afterwards, but in making sure that the person that they're looking for, the person of interest, the evidence that they're looking for is recovered based off the search warrant. And so when it comes to just the one on the left, the immigration warrant, you'll never in New Jersey typically see local or state police helping ICE with these warrants because there's no criminal complaint. There's no criminal activity alleged. This is a federal enforcement operation. And in New Jersey, we have the New Jersey Immigrant Trust Directive, which basically means that in carrying out these immigration enforcements, our local and state police won't dedicate the resources to assist them with this cruel and inhumane practice. Versus the one on the district court side, that's a criminal warrant. The police do operate in criminal in carrying out criminal warrants. And that's why oftentimes there's a confusion between if it's the police, if it's ICE, who is at the scene when some of these incidents go down. So to verify warrants, of course, you can ask for a warrant through the door, through the window, through a mailbox slot. You should not open the door to ask for the warrant. But once you have the warrant, if it's an actual judicial warrant, you should verify that it has your correct name, correct address, a real judge's signature, and that it's not expired. Because again, without that judicial warrant, ICE cannot enter your home unless you let them in. Once you let them in, they can then start to question and arrest anyone inside. Okay, so now we go to step number 3. So what happens, and this is, now we're getting into both, right? Public and private, applicable in both. So what happens if immigration officers enter your home? Or in the same train of thought, what happens if they stop you on a public street and they do not have an arrest warrant, right? In both cases, once they enter your home or they stop you on a public street without a warrant, they cannot detain you unless they have probable cause. So you've accidentally cracked the door open to ask for the warrant. They just stormed right in at that point. They now have everyone inside the home handcuffed on the floor, and they begin to ask everyone questions. They're doing that because at that moment, they don't have probable cause to arrest anyone. They don't know who anyone's name is. They're just starting the process to begin to try to extract that probable cause once they're inside your home. Or if they stop you on the public street, they're going to start to ask you questions. Again, they don't know who your name is. They see you, you look working class, you look a little bit black or brown, and they think that maybe if they ask you questions, you'll give up information on yourself to the point where they have probable cause to arrest you. So that's why we don't tell them where we're born. We don't tell them if we came to the United States in a certain year. We're advising a lot of our community members that they do have the right to show identification, but that this could lead to more questions or escalate the situation. So oftentimes, one of the best forms of ID to use is not an ID from your home country, like from the Mexican consulate, your foreign passport. We're really asking them to get a New Jersey driver's license or New Jersey state ID, which is the same license that I have. It's the standard license, and it doesn't confer any proof of immigration status. So with that license, they don't know if you're Christian Moreno born in Atlantic City or Christian Moreno born in a different country. It's just a state ID. And so sometimes to avoid the escalation of situation, they say, hey, I'm looking for Alexander Mendoza. You sort of look like Alexander Mendoza. And I say, no, I'm Christian Moreno. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer any questions, but I'm not that person. And they say, okay, well, if you show me proof that you're not the subject of this judicial warrant, we'll let you go. And so it's really a tough situation at that point because they could refuse the right to show ID. That's their constitutional right. But in doing so, they would escalate the situation. They might get detained unlawfully, taken to a field office in Mount Laurel just to get fingerprinted and prove if he's Alexander Mendoza or not. Or he could show his New Jersey ID, prove he's not the subject of their investigation, and at that point, then refuse to answer any more additional questions, right? At that point, you've proven that you're not the subject of an investigation. You can walk away, you can ask if you're free to go, but you don't sit there and answer more questions. So it's really nuanced. It's not just like, I'm not going to talk to you. It's like we have to put a lot of this in context. Okay, so again, sort of just went over this, but we do not carry foreign ID, anything that indicates your country of origin. Definitely do not carry false immigration documents on your person. Do carry valid state IDs or driver's licenses. If you have been in this country for over 2 years, we are asking folks to carry evidence of that. Again, this relates to whether or not you would be subject to expedited removal, meaning if you've been in here for less than 2 years in the country, if you are recently arrived, you would be subject to expedited removal without the right to a bond hearing. And so a lot of times agents are trying to just say everyone has been in here less than 2 years, when in reality they've been in here for 3 years, 4 years. And so if you don't have proof that you've been here over 2 years, you could be subject to expedited removal, sort of unfairly. And if you do have evidence of legal immigration status, we are asking folks to carry a copy of their work permit or permanent resident card with them. And so if you have DACA, for example, they issue a work authorization card. If you have some countries still have TPS, and so they can carry that form of temporary protective status. Some are legal permanent resident card holders, which means the residents or green card holders, they can carry their LPR card with them. Anything that does confer proof of legal status, you should carry with you. If not, you run the risk of getting arrested and then having to prove your entire case in court, which at the end of the day, you might get freed, but you get rounded up in the meantime. And we've seen that a lot with some national cases that have been happening. Okay, and so if an immigration agent stops you on the street and they don't have an arrest warrant, obviously we're saying that they cannot detain you unless they have probable cause or proof that you are not a citizen. You didn't answer any questions. You didn't answer anything about your status. They don't know who you are. They just saw you on the street, right? They just saw you at a bus stop, in a restaurant. We're teaching our folks in Spanish a little bit of English, which is asking a simple statement as, am I being arrested or detained, or am I free to go? But this also is being helped with the Know Your Rights red cards that are being distributed nationally right now. Since January, Pueblo Unido had distributed over 7,500 red Know Your Rights cards. We're still waiting on our restock, but we've given them out to local businesses, schools, bodegas. We used to meet up with teachers like in the parking lot and like just give them Know Your Rights red cards so they can distribute it to their students. We now have a partnership with the Atlantic City Schools District, so we'll be able to go into the schools and give out these red cards to our parents to teach them about these rights. But that red card is a simple and fast way for you to be able to express to an ICE agent that you have rights, and if they don't have probable cause, are you being arrested or detained, or are you free to walk away? Again, we're saying walk away. We're not saying run away, because even as simple as something as running away from an immigration agent gives them probable cause to detain you. Like now they have reasonable suspicion because you ran away that you might be in here in this country unlawfully, and then they would arrest you at that point. You just calmly walk away. Really practical steps here. This, for everyone on the call, for all our allies on the call, this is like the most hardest slide of all of them, because we just spent like the last 30 minutes instructing you folks about the rights in this country for our community members. When we explain it to them, we told them what to do, follow the 6 steps. But then we have a slide that says, like, this is the unfortunate reality. The unfortunate reality is you may be arrested even if you asserted all your rights, because ICE agents right now are dealing with national quotas, essentially, that causes them to arrest and detain people without probable cause, without sufficient probable cause, just to meet their numbers. And I think in New Jersey, it's over 200 to 300 arrests per day in New Jersey, immigration arrests. Nationally, it's like 2 to 3,000. And so it used to be 75 arrests, and they've increased it recently in this past summer. And then on bullet point number 2, I want to take a second to talk about this because we learned about this the hard way in person. ICE is now deploying a new multi-billion, and that's correct with a B, a multi-billion-dollar mobile application, an app that uses facial recognition software and is connected to a CBP, which is Customs and Border Patrol database that has over 200 million photos to determine someone's immigration status. Sort of without having you say a single word, right? You've reserved the right to remain silent. They can take your photo, and with that facial recognition, they would pull up any and all immigration records based off your face, based off your facial recognition. And so that's actually what we saw deployed in Ocean City, which is part of Kame County, this past summer, over a month ago now. When they entered a home, they had a judicial warrant, so they entered the home with the police involved. But once the police left in Ocean City, they began to question everyone in the house. They handcuffed everyone, right? Like, forget about the judicial warrant, because now they started talking about their immigration status. They used the judicial warrants almost as a pretext to get into the home. Once the police left, they stayed. They arrested everyone. They handcuffed everyone on the floor. They didn't allow them to make any phone calls except for one. And in that time, they separated them and they started asking them one by one about their immigration status. They had all attended our Know Your Rights workshop in Ocean City in February. So all of them reserved the right to remain silent under threat and under hostile actions. The ICE agents quote said, if you don't start talking, we're going to call more agents and take everyone away. And they still reserved the right to remain silent. What happened was, in that process, they started taking photos of everyone with this new application, with this new mobile app. And when they took a photo of one of them, one of our young community members from Ocean City, it came up on the mobile app that he had entered the United States one time before, 2 years ago and 2 months ago. So right over the 2-year mark, that he entered the United States the first time, but was unfortunately apprehended by Border Patrol the first time he tried coming into the country 2 years ago. And so he was ultimately sent back right away. The first time he came, he did make it the second time to Ocean City, New Jersey. And all that came up when they took his photos. And so because they determined that he had already tried to enter the country once and was deported once before, they used that application information to detain him on the spot and ultimately arrest him right away and take him to Delaney Hall. And that's the case we have in Newark. So this is a really hard slide for us to talk with our community members because they just reserved the right to remain silent. But with this new application, some of them are still getting detained and ultimately arrested, right? Some of them are still being discriminated against and still being arrested without probable cause, just based off how they look, the language they speak, how they're dressed. And so it's still important that, even if they're arrested or detained, they still assert their rights to fight a later day in court. And ultimately, we're telling folks not to sign anything without an attorney, even if they pressure you, right? And so here, because it's an immigration court, right, they don't necessarily have the right to an attorney, but they have the right to speak to their Mexican consulate, to their consulate. And the consulate is really on the ground right now, side by side with a lot of the immigration justice organizations in the state of New Jersey, because the consulate is helping us go visit the families or go visit the loved ones in detention right away, like a day or two after they're arrested and detained and sent to a detention center. The consulates act as attorneys to provide orientation, to provide them with their Know Your Rights while in detention. And so we're telling our community members, don't sign anything until we get them an attorney or we get them to speak with their consulate. Because it's happened personally, it's happened anecdotally where those ICE agents will give them a piece of paper and say, hey, sign this if you want to eat tonight, sign this if you want to make a phone call. They sign it not knowing what's said in English, and ultimately it ends up being a voluntary self-deportation order. And that night they're deported back to their home country. It's happened before, it happened to someone in our family. And so we know what could be done if you sign things without a representative. And so with that all in mind, let's I think someone said it, I think it was Julie or Joanne, but what happens in a mixed space, right? It could be your work, it could be, in this context for everyone, an event festival, it could be maybe you're hosting like a back to school event, maybe you're hosting direct services at your office, but the context is a mixed space, which means both public and private, right? And so we always instruct our fellow nonprofit agencies, our fellow employers, that ICE cannot enter the private workspace without a judicial warrant signed by a judge. And so for restaurants, because we are going around to restaurants, we're saying that yes, they may enter the lobby, the seating area, but they can't enter the back of the house, the private offices, without that judicial warrant signed by a judge. And so we're telling them, if you have managers to get trained on Know Your Rights, if you have higher level staff, that they are really the vanguard between ICE in the public space versus ICE crossing over into the private employee only area. And so we have this conversation with managers because they're the ones that really can defend the workers if ICE does show up. They're the ones that are going to be on the front line saying, ICE, where's your warrant? ICE, where's your judicial warrant? And especially not giving them permission to enter. So again, we don't open the door. and we verify the warrant, especially if it's a private space. We don't answer questions. We don't sign anything. We ask if we're free to go. We document and we communicate. There's a difference between public and private spaces, and that's the question of whether or not they need a warrant. I wanted to show a few examples just to sort of put it into context, but we are, like I mentioned, we're not necessarily relying on any federal piece of legislation right now to save us, but we are relying on some of our services and some of our volunteer projects, which include our power of attorney legal clinics to help families prepare for cases of emergency so that their someone can pick them up from school in the case that the parents get detained while they're in school. We are training volunteers on accompaniment, which means that they go with our immigrant community members to some of these critical appointments at Delaney Hall, at the USCIS courthouse in Newark or in Mount Laurel. Alexander's going to speak a minute on what that process looks like to go with the family to Delaney Hall in Newark, which is the second detention center that just opened up this past year, because it really is nerve-wracking to go with these families to visit their loved ones in detention. And Alexander's leading that accompaniment program. You sort of have all gotten trained on Know Your Rights. There's a few more presentations that we do for volunteers, especially what happens after someone gets sent to detention. And of course, I think the most important thing for us right now is our ICE Rapid Response Network, because we do have an emergency hotline where we mobilize to really verify and check out ICE activity in Atlantic and Calumet County. And so this is a 24/7 hour hotline. The number's right there. It's 609-200-1030. And we've answered calls as early as 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the morning. I myself and our team responded to the case in Ocean City when ICE was still in the house, right? So I show up after getting this call. I enter the home because they gave us our address and they said, please come in and help. And the first people I saw were the ICE agents, right? They were Homeland Security Investigation, HSI agents. And so a lot of this we do in team. We don't like to send anyone out alone. It's really, really nerve-wracking. I've been organizing for about 8 years now, and I still feel that fear of going one-on-one with an ICE agent. But this is the reality that we have to do as allies in order to protect our neighbors. And so a lot of this is grassroots in nature. There are some direct services, but there's also community organizing. And so I just wanted to show everyone some of the